222nd Contact Wednesday, February 3, 1988, 4:10 am pages 404-415. Billy says, Dear friend, yesterday I was asked a question about the Princess of Monte Carlo, that is, of Monaco, just with respect to the American former actress Grace Patricia Kelly, who received the sovereign title and the name Grimaldi through her marriage with Prince Rainier III of Monaco. The princess had an accident with her car on the 13th of September, 1982 during a return trip from the royal summer residence La Tubby to Monaco along with her 17-year-old daughter Stephanie. The next day, on the 14th of September, she succumbed to her serious injuries. The princess and her vehicle went off the road in a hairpin curve, fell down a slope, and flipped over several times. Daughter Stephanie had only suffered minor injuries, and it was said that she had driven the car without authorization. And now, exactly concerning this, I was asked whether this had actually been the case. At that time, to my knowledge, you sought to clarify the matter for whatever reasons. Quetzal says that is correct. My clarification occurred as a result of my own interests. What I have fathomed with this, however, has no relevance at all to the assertion that the prince's daughter Stephanie had driven the crashed vehicle. The truth and the reality is that Princess Grace Patricia Kelly, or rather Grimaldi, suffered a sudden, severe brain hemorrhage, which acted like a sudden severe stroke and caused an immediate loss of consciousness, through which, of course, also the control of her vehicle was lost, and she unavoidably came to the serious accident. Billy says that sounds logical. It also seemed illogical to me that Mrs. Kelly should have left her daughter, who was still a minor, behind the wheel. But since we're already talking about such things, I would like to concern you once again with regard to a question that appeals to your medical and psychiatric knowledge. Recently, I had to concern myself another time with the so-called voices, and to be sure, in reference to a man from New Zealand. His name is Kiwi, just as also the Chinese kiwi fruit is called, namely the fruit of the Chinese gooseberry shrub, or in the language of the Maori, the New Zealand kiwi bird, a nocturnal, flightless reptile. The long and short of it, to my knowledge, the hearing of voices concerns a form of schizophrenia, through which those who are afflicted by it hear a voice or multiple voices in their heads or something. Quetzal says that is also correct. With the hearing of voices, it concerns a form of schizophrenia, through which acoustic hallucinations are produced in the form of a voice or even several human voices, animal sounds, or thing-related tones, which are heard by the people afflicted by this form of schizophrenia in their consciousnesses because it has fallen to a schizophrenic disorder. Those who are afflicted by this form of schizophrenia are supposed to be listeners of conversations or to perceive any other sounds, noises, tones, or even music in an allegedly real form. In severe cases of this type of schizophrenia, even alleged dialogues occur between the hallucinatory voices and schizophrenic people, which also often leads to the fact that those afflicted by this disease of consciousness respond to alleged commands of the hallucinatory voices and carry out and commit actions and deeds that aren't comprehensible for normally healthy people. Thus, homicides of this kind appear not infrequently in a simple or serial form because the murder or killing of humans and animals or the destruction of pictures and articles, etc. are ordered by the alleged hallucinatory communication of the putative hallucinatory voices. An occurrence, through which confused, sick, deranged, and illogical as well as reason-poor thinking is caused with this form of schizophrenia in certain respects. A condition that doesn't have to be permanently present but which can also only appear sporadically. Those afflicted by this may even be people of good education, because the schizophrenia exhibits a split consciousness, which is determined not by the intelligence but by hallucinations and, thus, by an impairment of consciousness or by a pathological change in the state of consciousness. In harmless cases, the form of schizophrenia of the hearing of voices appears with the so-called dead speakers, ghost speakers, other world speakers and extraterrestrial speakers, who from time to time, through inner voices, even through the hearing of voices supposedly accept that they would hear voices of the dead, ghosts, demons, otherworldly ones, and extraterrestrials, and would even communicate with these. On Earth, you call such people mediums, necromancers, and chandlers, etc., but who, as explained, truly only have inner voices and believe that they would receive commands or messages from these and even communicate with them. Another form of this illness of consciousness also causes putative telepathic voices through unrealistic forms of thought and beliefs, by what means those afflicted by this illness believe that they would stand in telepathic connection with any beings of the worldly, otherworldly, or other-dimensioned or extraterrestrial form. Those afflicted by these forms of delusion believe that their delusions are real. Moreover, on the outside, they appear completely normal to their fellow human beings, who judge the false assertions of the schizophrenics as given and, thus, classify those who are sick in consciousness as completely normal, which, as a rule, is also typical of the professionals, such as psychologists and psychiatrists, who can also be deceived just like the layman. Billy says thanks. Your professional explanation will certainly open the eyes of very many people. But since you already speak of dead speakers, that is of necromancers, I would still like to ask a question in reference to a particular deceased person, if you know something about him. It concerns Leonardo da Vinci, which is certainly a name known to you. One asked me if I would know who his father and mother were. Pata explained to me on my great journey that Leonardo was the illegitimate offspring from a union of his father, Piero da Vinci, with a beautiful slave girl from the Orient, but I didn't want to answer the question in this way before I had inquired with you again, and indeed, because I'm no longer quite sure if I remember Pata's explanation correctly. You know that through my health collapse in the year 1982, my memory has suffered enormously, so I sometimes confuse some things. Quetzal says your recollection corresponds to the truth, so therefore, you can transmit a useful explanation. Billy says Mrs. Sutter will be pleased about that. Quetzal says, do you speak of Mrs. Marianne Sutter, who found her life again through your help? Billy says yes, I mean this Mrs. Sutter. She called me and asked the question. She has helped me very much financially on a loan, in order to be able to construct the center in general. Today, she lives at times in India, Pakistan, Nepal, and in Europe. Quetzal says she owes you her life and will never forget that. I know this because I know the story about her and you, and I have concerned myself with her character. Billy says Semyaza once spoke of the fact that in the distant future, somewhere in the mountains of the Rhine Valley, a volcano will break out, which is currently inactive but which will also become active in the subsoil, like also various volcanoes somewhere in Germany, which will also become active again in the distant future. One has also asked me about this, but unfortunately, I no longer know what place in Germany was meant. Quetzal says it isn't a place but rather an entire area, which is designated as Eiffel. There prevails a great slumbering of underground volcanism, which will produce powerful above-ground eruptions again in the distant future and destroy entire landscapes. Billy says yes, exactly, that was the name. Then still another question. Gilgamesh was descended from a race that came from a galaxy that is still unknown on Earth. Moreover, he was about 3 meters tall. How can it be that he still lives on Earth today unrecognized? Relatively seen to the Earth person, he also doesn't age, for he, as you've explained, is 50,000 years old or more. And since you know him so well and also have the possibility of taking him back to his world, why don't you do this? Quetzal says you are mistaken in reference to the fact that the home galaxy of Gilgamesh is unknown on Earth because it was already discovered in the year 1781 by an astronomer named Meier. This is a somewhat oval spiral galaxy, which is simply called M94 NGC 4736 by the earthly astroscientists, and which is seen about 20 million light-years away from the Earth. Billy says in our space-time